Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It does promise to be a very insightful session that we have today on leading impactful and cohesive teams. Today's webinar is brought to you by Queen's IRC. My name is Lindsay Van Zulen, and I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager here at the IRC. I'll be your host as well as the moderator for today's session. I am very thrilled to be here with you as we explore strategies for building stronger and more connected teams that deliver meaningful results. To begin, I would like us to acknowledge that Queens is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee First Peoples Territory. We make this statement in an act of reconciliation, honoring the land and Indigenous presence here, which dates back over 10,000 years. We are grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. If you're ever unsure of the traditional lands in which you are situated, we'd like to encourage you to learn more about the territory upon which you sit. So before we dive into today's session, let's just take care of a couple housekeeping items. Firstly, the webinar will be recorded. So if you do need to step away or you miss any part of the session, don't worry, you will receive a recording within a couple of days. With this recording, please feel free to share it with your network to sort of continue that learning. Secondly, we love to hear from you. So please feel free to submit any questions that you have via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will hold any questions that are asked for the dedicated Q&A portion at the end of our 40 to 45-minute presentation. Now it's my pleasure to welcome our two facilitators for today's webinar, Linda Allen-Hardisty and Deborah Hudson, who each bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in building and leading teams. Linda is an award-winning executive coach dedicated to leadership, evolution, and effectiveness. With over 20 years of experience as a coach, consultant, and business leader, she has guided corporate executives and emerging leaders to achieve personal and professional success. Known for her pragmatic approach, Linda specializes in navigating complexity, fostering resilience, and building high-performing cultures. As a 2024 International Coach Federation's Coaching Impact Award award nominee, Linda holds the professional designation of Master Certified Coach from the ICF and Individual Team Coach and accreditation from the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. Her expertise spans operational and strategic leadership, empowering clients across diverse industries to drive transformative growth. As a facilitator with Queen's IRC, Linda leads our performance coaching and building trust programs, and she also is co-facilitating our new Building and Leading Teams program with Deborah. Now over to Deborah. Deborah is a founding partner at Hudson Sinclair LLP, and she specializes in labor and employment law. Called to the bar in 2008, she advises on all aspects of the employment relationship, including contracts, accommodations, human rights, and terminations. Deborah offers practical, timely legal advice, emphasizing resolution when suitable and advocacy when necessary. She conducts workplace investigations on issues like harassment, privacy breaches, and fraud. A prolific writer, she has contributed to the publications such as Startup Law 101 and Ontario Human Rights Code Quick Reference. She's also authored numerous articles for the IRC. Deborah speaks on our fact-finding and investigations program and co-facilitates our new Building and Leading Teams program with Linda. So thank you for being with us today, everyone. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Deborah and Linda.
Thank you, Lindsay. I know that both Linda and I are so happy to be here with you, and we're excited to go through our presentation today.
Thank you, Lindsay, for that. And Deborah, well said. Let's get going. We have lots to share. I am just going to pull up our next screen here, and this is just a refresher of what we are focused on today. And obviously something in here really has pulled all of your attention to be here. But in today's webinar, we're going to focus on this. Being a cohesive team involves both collaboration and individual contribution. And one of the greatest opportunities for team leaders is to know when and how to strike this balance. And there are many factors to consider, including engaging your high performers, supporting employee development, achieving organizational goals, and optimizing hybrid workspaces. So in our webinar today, there are 3 areas that we will focus on: gaining insights and key findings from what Deborah and I have researched, observed, and seen in our own practice firsthand with leaders and organizations. Understand how teams can create collectively and integrate and foster the individual contribution as well, and discover how to develop the desired team culture and dynamics. So to get yourself ready for the webinar, I would invite you right now to think about your personal experience in leading teams or being a part of a team. And there are 2 things I'd like you to just think about and get in your own mind. So on the right-hand side of your screen, I'd like you to think about a time where you were part of a team and there was a disappointment on that team. The outcome, maybe it was a disappointment on the way there. Maybe there was a fail in some particular part of it. Maybe it didn't achieve what you want. And when you think about that disappointment on that team, whether you were part of the team as a contributor or you were leading the team, think about what was your contribution to the disappointment that unfolded on the team. So you've got that. Usually people come to webinars because of the right-hand side of a disappointment, but really think about what your contribution was and what it was about that situation that was disappointing. And at the same time, I'd also like you to think about a high five moment on a team that you were leading or a part of. It might have been a challenging situation that you resolved as a group. The outcome was great. You might have recovered so well from a fail that it just felt really great in the outcome. Might have been creating a new relationship with someone or gaining some new skills, did something better for your client, your customer, whatever it was. Think about that high five moment. And then the next level is, what was your contribution to what made that the high five moment? So keep both those scenarios in mind as Deborah and I go forth in our conversation with you today. And I'd like you to just in your own mind think about, what are you going to be hearing in our webinar that might explain what that disappointment was? What are you going to hear that maybe might realize for you, yeah, we did this well. This was a high five moment. My contribution, definitely, here's what I did great. So really keep both these situations in mind. Deborah, I'm going to kick this one over to you. And as we were getting ready for our webinar this morning, we were diving right into even more about recent news about this topic of team in the workplace.
So when we think about the workplace now, there have been so many changes over the last 5 years, and it really sort of was forced in March 2020 when everybody had to start working virtually due to COVID, or not everybody, the desk jobs had to do that, the non-desk jobs stayed in the workplace. But so over the recent years, we've seen sort of since 2023 onward, a lot of the larger companies starting to call people back to work, a couple days a week. And we've really seen that sort of ramp up in the last, several months. So Amazon announced recently that they're ending remote work in 2025. JP Morgan's bringing staff back 5 days a week. These are all articles we found in the news. Preparing for today, I did a quick Google search and I found hot off the press today, General Mills is starting to call workers back to work. That's in American news. Also, Donald Trump last week, among many things, had said he wants federal workers back at the desk. So I think that, there was some movement and it's starting really, really to ramp up on this part. And then we looked sort of over at the Canadian news. So the Canadian federal government called workers back in September, hybrid. And the Ottawa Citizen reported that data they collected said a high percentage of these workers are not compliant with the requirement. And specifically noted about 1/5, so about 20% of employees from the Employment and Social Development Canada non-compliant. So we have workers being called back to work. We have non-compliance with some of the rules. And, what does this look like? Like employers need to rethink, social connections in the era of remote work. and the impact of loss of connection. So, you hear some people who are fully remote wanting to get back to work, wanting to engage, wanting more mentorship. And on the other side, you hear employees, who have moved far away or who have obligations like working parents with children that have to be dropped off that, find it a lot more difficult to go back full time, at least 5 days a week. So there's sort of lots to pack in and lots to think about. But this changing landscape where people were working virtual and now hybrid or full time in the office, that's something that we need to consider when we're talking about productivity in the workplace and teams and how everyone's performing.
Yeah, it's really timely even to have a webinar today on this very topic. And even when I was coming into my office today, I stopped to get a coffee and I was listening to two people chat. And one person said to the other, "This is the place that I work." And we were remote and now we're back. And there was something about the way she said back, like returning, something would have expected, a little bit of resignation, but also, yeah, we're back. And so it was just interesting to kind of hear how people are making sense of really what's going on. So Deborah, I really like how you already teed up the conversation on teams. And when we talk about how teams work together, we have to consider what's really going on for them in this surrounding situation.
I can say like my experience now with I act for small businesses and I act for employees. When people were first called back early on, there was a lot more resistance. And now, like you said, I'm back. Like people know that it is part of it and it's, time and certain. And some people even, are craving the connection and, the in-person opportunities as well. So I think that that's very important to, learn about what your staff's needs are and what they're looking for, especially coming back in person.
And I think remembering that we're all still in transition. We're still figuring this out. And for some people in leadership roles, even leading this way is still very new. So Deborah, I know that we have a couple polls here as well, questions for all of you. And we really hope that when Lindsay pulls this question up, I really encourage you to vote. We get you involved right away, and that'll be really important to us. So I'll just turn this one over to you, Deborah, on the question.
So the first question is, do you believe that there are generational differences in worker engagement? So I know when I first started working as a lawyer in my 20s, everyone complained that we weren't working as hard as the generation before. And I'm now in my 40s and I'm finding that people are making the same complaints. But what is your actual experience right now? Like, how are you feeling about it? Do you feel there are generational differences in worker engagement? And make your choice. And I'm so excited to see how this comes back. So I'm hoping all of you will put your vote in.
Just going to give it another couple seconds here, and then I'm just going to close.
Okay.
Wow. So I am actually not surprised by these results. So yes, 69% feel there are generational differences. 26 say somewhat, it depends. 3% say no, and 1% unsure. So it's like almost 70% saying they feel that. And I'm getting a lot of feedback from my clients on this, and anecdotally through other people. So and then, we're going to get to it, but there's some sort of data collected that says that there may be as well. But it's useful for us to have this conversation because we want to hear about what the experiences are. Because the purpose today is to talk about solutions and like what's going on, why, what's going on with this circumstance, because how can we make it better? Why is it happening and how we can make it better?
Nice. And how we can leverage some of those differences. So 60%. And the next question.
So our next question, how engaged do you feel Canadian workers are currently? Highly, mid-range, low, unsure. So again, we encourage you to answer those questions. We love, hearing from the audience. about current employee engagement. And I will note that me and Linda are not allowed to vote.
Yeah, and we intentionally didn't define engage, so we know leaving it up to you and to your own interpretation of everything that that may encompass.
Yeah, because different businesses operate different ways. So
Okay, I'll just close the poll here in a couple more seconds.
So 4% say highly engaged. I want to work with you guys. 70% mid-range, 19% low, and 7% unsure. What would be interesting to know is how this would, how this would have been answered, 2019, or like, is the mid-range majority standard or not? I can't give you that answer, but it's very interesting for us to see these numbers, and I'm interested to hear Linda's take on it as well.
Yeah, let's keep that in mind as we look at, as you say, the solutions coming up for what to do when you are leading teams. Like 70% mid-range, also the upside of that could say there could be a lot to leverage. People have been hybrid and or back on site for a while now. So I think this is actually possibly encouraging to some of the current research and trends that you're going to share next, Deborah. And I think the piece around the Canadians is really interesting. So I'm going to weave that into what we talk about the solutions, but let's ground it into another direction we'd actually like to get you to think about as well. But over to you, Deborah, on what current research is finding on work ethic.
So when Linda and I were preparing, we were saying anecdotally, we're hearing a lot of people sort of raising concerns about work ethic in the workplace. And I can say in my law practice, I definitely hear about that. I also hear, on the satisfaction piece from the employee side, I hear a lot of people who are not satisfied and, they want to get new jobs. They want to go somewhere else. They don't like certain things. So we're hearing about these things anecdotally, but so we tried to find, what is the research saying? So in terms of work ethic, I found, according to a 2022 Gallup poll, 54% of Gen Z employees are ambivalent or not engaged at work, which is higher than the other generations. But I should note that other generations are still not engaged in work at higher numbers than before. That's what that one said. And in terms of job dissatisfaction, Forbes 2025 trends, employees are experiencing unprecedented levels of dissatisfaction and disengagement. According to Gallup's latest workplace well-being indicator, only 50% of US employees report thriving in their overall lives, marking a record low since the measurement began in 2009. And then I was looking at a Canada perspective, and Gallup 2024, 62% of employees not engaged. And then I pulled out this quote because I just found that it was so interesting and on point. Just a worker said, I could push it, but I'm so frustrated with the way things are going that day that I'm like, you know what, I'm going to do nothing. And that's sort of that quiet quitting concept we were hearing about a few years ago, where you're not going to push it. So I'm actually encouraged by the attendees' answers, because I think they're sort of better than what some of this research is indicating. But the research is indicating that there is a lack of engagement. And I should note, and I think Linda and I were speaking about this preparing, the Bank of Canada has also said workers Canadian workers are having a productivity problem. Like there is a declining productivity in Canada's economy, which is basically worse than most other, similar countries. So that's not great. And I think I don't know exactly how they measure it, more on monetary data as well. But so we are seeing less productivity anecdotally from what people are reporting on Gallup, as well as financially in terms of, what the Bank of Canada is saying, unhappy workers. So we want to sort of dig into, why is this happening? How can we improve this? How can we lead people to be more engaged? And what's different? Like, one thing that's very different is people started working from home, and now it's hybrid, or they're back in the office. So there's all these changes, and that certainly probably has something to do with it. And People, expect to learn and be mentored and all these sorts of things in different ways. We want to understand that, and we want to help our employees thrive in the workplace.
Let's talk about what are some of the things that you leaders of teams can do, really understanding how do we help have these conversations with the Stevens of the world about how they're feeling that level of frustration, but how can we really lean in and leverage some of the other conversations that are starting to come up anyway around work ethic and what that conversation can do. So we're going to offer you 3 different ways to consider what you can do when you're leading your team. So how teams can create collectively and also foster individual contributions. I'd like to talk a little bit about team cohesion, how we have people connect with each other and create some relationship with each other. We'll talk about that collective piece, how we can create and move the entire team collectively. And then an equally important part, but sometimes left out of the team conversation, is the individual contributions on that team and to that team and the contribution. So really want to break this down into 3 areas. And as you listen to this, I would just flag you back to those 2 scenarios I ask that you think about as a disappointment and a high five moment on a team, where you may see that come to life here, or if you going forward, something that might give you ideas for that. So when we talk about creating team cohesion, Peter Hawkins has done a lot of work and research internationally around what makes a high-performing team. It's the purpose that determines the team, not the people. Just offer you reflect on that for a moment. It's the purpose that determines the team, not the people. This is a bit of a shift from decades ago around team effectiveness and creating team, where we really focused on everybody on the team, in that department, on that project, reporting to the same person. There was something that we just thought was all around the people. And what's really becoming a little bit more apparent now is what's the purpose of calling groups of people together to achieve. So this is a very important thing to really think about and really get very specific around where we need to be cohesive in this group. A concept called relatedness is a very common way to look at this. So how do people in this group, on this team, need to relate to each other to achieve the goals that they're called forth to do, to work on together? 2 points for the relatedness on cohesion. So knowing when and at what time that team needs to co-create. This is another great term on high performance teams from Peter Hawkins that I'm noticing with my clients that I work with, the executives that I coach individually, or the leadership teams that I do team coaching with. The concept of co-create means when we are called together for a meeting, a conversation, a decision, what is it that we can co-create so at the end of that meeting, we walked out of it with an outcome that we couldn't have created working in parallel or individually. So opposed to coming into a meeting with pre-cooked notions and ideas, co-creating live in the moment, building on someone's idea, formulating a perspective that is informed by what somebody else brought into the meeting. Looking at those areas where you might not be seeing things the same way, unpacking and wrestling with that a little bit, really exploring that. There are times where co-creating is really required in a group, and it can create a really unique situation when leaders start to focus on those moments, and it's not every time, but those moments where we need to co-create together, walking out of a meeting with something we couldn't have arrived at had we worked in parallel. This is different than collaborating. And what I've noticed with a lot of teams that I work with is they really like this reframe on co-creating opportunities to co-create instead of just talking about collaboration. Collaboration is one approach that's needed for some work on teams, but there are moments we can get very specific when it's really more about co-creating. So people are really resonating with that. And it's really landing a lot better with some leaders to think about, yeah, when do we really need to gather to have these innovative conversations to get us to a place we could not have gotten to had we been individual. And the second thing around team cohesion and that concept of relatingness, how do we relate to each other to achieve what we need to achieve? What is the vision of that team working towards? What is it that we are working on achieving together? What does that look like? What are we aiming for? In my experience, when there is conflict between people, it most often is because they're not looking at the same picture of what good looks like. They're not looking at the same picture of the end results. And sometimes a lot of leaders take their eye off that and think, oh, everybody knows where we're going and what it looks like. But it's something that needs to be revisited, brought back up again, and a lot of time spent on really realizing and letting everybody understand and contribute to what is that vision. So most conflict on teams or between people, in my experience, is because that the one thing is really missing and it's unclear, or people are looking at it in completely different ways. So if you're having trouble having people relate to each other and creating that sense of cohesion, ask yourself this question. Is it really clear? And is everyone looking at the same picture of what the end and good looks like once we get there? It's a great wonder about. Creating collectively. So now that you know how teams need to relate, you've thought about what that is and different ways to get at that, and do we have the same vision? Things that need to happen on a team. There are a couple things that are really unfolding and becoming really consistent around different articles and research that we're seeing around teams. And that's really how we optimize our workspaces. A couple of things I'm seeing happen a lot is that leaders are really setting a very clear, coordinated schedule when everybody in that group or that team needs to be in the office on site together, and differentiating that from remote time. Being really intentional and purposeful to leverage that in-office time together, where that co-creation unfolds a little bit differently when we're in person than it does on the screen. As an example, a group I was working with, their Wednesdays were days that they are working together in a meeting room together where they innovate and they strategize. These are the days for that. If there's any task that can be done individually or an individual contribution element, the leader really tries to have that done on the day or days where people are remote from the office. So this really requires a leader to plan and think differently, a little bit more with that intentionality, a lot more than even 5 years ago when you really think about it. You're really designing and curating those interaction and moments for people when they are in the office, and also working with them to create that culture where in office, here's the things that we work on together. Here are the tasks and thinking time or other things that you can do when you are working remotely. So this is really an area and a muscle and a skill set I'm seeing leaders developing and really focusing on that muscle more. And this is almost unprecedented than anything I've seen team leaders really have to focus on before. This takes, and those of you who have done this, it takes thinking, a design time, really being intentional what that is. And people really like structure. People do like to have a little bit of guidance and framework as to what needs to be done, what the expectations are within, and what autonomy they can have once they're within that. Conflict, I'd mentioned that earlier before, and one of the first steps you can do to really strengthen conflict skills, and you notice I'm not calling it conflict management skills or conflict resolution skills, but just conflict skills, because I'm really finding leaders to kind of normalize this. This is a part of good teamwork. It's gaining a little bit of traction. But one of the things that really can help that vision and to really start to create some of those bonds and relationships is to have everybody describe and share with each other what their perfect day at work looks like. Describe when you are remote, what does your perfect day look like? Are you getting up in the morning, having coffee? Are you connecting with people on the screen first? Are you checking your messages? What does that look like for you? Does it give you an opportunity to have lunch? Going downstairs and hanging out with your dog? Are you going outside? Is your boss checking in with you? Do you have a one-on-one meeting scheduled with your team leader? What does a perfect day look like? And then when you're on site with everybody, what does a perfect day look like? Describe it. It's a way to really understand how everyone is kind of wired, what makes them really tick, what's important to them, and it creates some non-work bonding and conversation. You can create some of those milestones of what the impact you want to have as a team if I know what a good day like for you actually looked like, and I have a chance to share what my ideal day looks like. It just really kind of opens up for when those times that you might not live it the way you want. You now have a bit of empathy and understanding for the other person that this is not their typical ideal perfect day, but here we are together and what we're dealing with. And the other one I've noticed, I'm calling this leader presence. I was coaching a leader who was telling me how much time he needed to spend with two members of his team as they were collaborating and co-creating on something. And he kept having this flavor, a bit of annoyance, as I always have to be there. I always have to kind of foster and facilitate this conversation and help them. And when I became curious with him about, well, what's the outcome when you are spending time with these two people on a team? Consistently, he shared that it was always better. It always got them through where they needed to go. And his frustration was, am I going to have to do this all the time? Well, maybe. But at this time, this is where you need to be. So when leaders think, I don't want to be a micromanager, but there are people who might need me, you have a role. Leader presence at any given time needs to be there. So if you're joining in on that time, you actually might be fulfilling a role that team or those two people or three people might need from you for a while. So that collective piece, I think these are the two things with some examples in there that are really making an impact in what we're finding, not only in research, but what I'm finding in a lot of the leaders that I'm coaching and teams that I'm working with or experimenting with. And Deborah, before I go to really kind of shift gears here a little bit and talk about individual contributions, I'd just like to bring you into the conversation. How is this resonating with some of the clients and files and situations that you're dealing with in your clients and talking about team and at work?
In so many ways, like this got me thinking, like, first of all of these concepts you're discussing, when it relates back to employee satisfaction and employee engagement, people don't want to be told to do something just for the sake of doing it. So like come to the office just because you have to be there, and then you're on Teams meetings all day, and you're not engaging with your boss who you want to have one-on-one time with, or your coworkers directly, and you're not creating. So I think that when we're calling people back into the office for, say, hybrid schedule, we want to be very purposeful about that time so they feel like, I get why I'm here. I'm inspired by this co-creation, or I feel like, great, I could have that coffee chat with my supervisor or my coworker. And so I think we need to think about using those times purposefully. And on the flip side, a large part of my practice is workplace investigations, and I'm finding a lot of the workplace investigation work involves miscommunication. So that's on the flip side, when people are sending emails back and forth, when they're not engaging one-on-one, where they don't see the facial expression, or where they just can't say, direct that conflict head on and say, you know what, that made me feel uncomfortable, or I'm not liking this. That causes more conflict, which escalates into a workplace investigation, which makes the workplace very unproductive. I don't want to knock my work, but it's very disruptive and unproductive, and it's not where we want to spend our time, energy, and money. Nobody wants to spend their money on lawyers, of course, right? So but all of those concepts work, make sense. Like, engage people, co-create, inspire, mentor, that's why, when we're in the office. And if you're not in the office, you also need to lead by example. So if you're calling people back into the office, leadership needs to be back into the office. That's actually, I was doing a workplace audit recently, and that was a big complaint. All the employees were required to be in the office, but their supervisor, they felt micromanaged by their supervisor who wasn't in the office. And life comes up. People have medical appointments and different things, like wanting the flexibility that the leader was doing. So all of these concepts, I think, are important for productivity, satisfaction, and cohesiveness.
Wow. I mean, those are great insights, Deborah. You really have that sight into what could have been if some other things were done. So it's great that we can share these lessons learned. Let's just now layer onto this the individual. And this is the part of team that I think has been maybe wasn't thought of as important, but these people in a group are individuals and they have their own development needs and contributions. And I think, Deborah, you said that really well, even their own communication styles. There is a generation in this workplace, the new generation into work, that over the last 5 years since COVID, their first work experience was remote. And for some of those people, they're only now experiencing in person and on site. So when you are on site, building in those opportunities to walk between meetings, pass someone in the hallway, have a conversation, or get a cup of coffee with somebody, like that, those unplanned, informal drive-bys and walk-bys and those conversations that you get, I think also contributes to something that might have been a quick text or Teams message. You can say actually to somebody there in person. So on the individual side, here are some common themes in research and in things that I think both Deborah and I have both observed that are emerging. And I'm also going to say re-emerging. So high performers, support and feedback reduces isolation and neglect. Ruth Gochian has done a lot of current amazing work on the high performers in our organizations and a bit of a scary trend about how they're actually being ignored, not on purpose, but a lot of leaders who are reading her articles and thinking about this are now realizing we're just putting their attention to it. They need feedback and support from you, and it can reduce that isolation and neglect that they might be feeling. You as a team leader, are you focused more on the low performers or those who are still development or maybe struggling? Are you also giving equal time and discovering ways to interact with your high performers? What is it they need to do? What do they need from you to be recognized, to get the attention, having a different conversation with you than they might have with somebody else? This is a really important one. And the reason I say it's re-emerging is it's really re-emerging of the impact to an organization if leaders don't pay attention to this group. This is typically the group where a lot of the innovation, creativity, the productivity comes from. But for leaders, team leaders who are intentionally carving out that time, seeking them out, and I think those of you on this call, many of you likely will be doing this already, but really realizing that they're a very important group. The individual side as well is on employment development overall. And this is also emerging and re-emerging. It's been a conversation for a long time that performance review is an ongoing process constantly. And it's captured by regular, frequent touching, conversations, course correction in real time, touching base all the time. This is what it is now. And I think prior to our world of really perfecting this remote way of working as another great way to do work, this is the part that is actually kind of working in the favor of how we move away from traditional old ways of performance management that's not adding the value to really focus on development and review in real time all the time. And I think that's one of the silver linings actually that the last 5 years in remote work has actually given us, is that this is actually maybe forced or given leaders another opportunity to really get at what might be holding them back. because remote work is a tool that we've now perfected over these 5 years, but it's not the definition of work. We've now gotten really, really good at that option. So here at the bottom, the individual contribution, if you're a team leader, you also have an individual contribution to think about, and that's your own personal development as a team leader. And I think we have new competencies around this that are really evolving and are still being shaped. How to use remote work, when to build that in. When I have that coordinated schedule of people coming in on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, what are we doing for that in-person time on co-creating that needs to be done? How are we carving out, and how am I influencing and encouraging the more individual time that might be done better remote? So for all of you, first of all, well done, because you have done this. And I would say going forward, if you're feeling a bit of pressure here, or it's always something that's coming back, I think this is really saying this is a whole new area of leadership competencies that are really exploding far beyond what it used to be, where a leadership competency around fostering team play or how to discover common ground is now even more. This is a bigger, more influential competency in how you deliver. So you are developing new skills. You are focusing in this probably more than you've ever done before. Deborah, on the individual side, what else for you can you add to what you're seeing on anything on how individuals contribute and develop?
Well, I mean, I agree with all the points you made. I mean, in my experience, like people do want to show up and do a good job. So it's useful to just tell them in real time what you're looking for and what you're, like how they can get there to doing a good job. And one thing is if they are functioning remote, like sometimes we need to think about like it's like the pre-game, the game, and the post-game. So I can speak about the law practice. Like, normally when I was in office, you'd go to the partner's office, sit at their desk, talk about the meeting, and then have the client meeting if it's on the phone or in the boardroom, and then have the post meeting and say, here's what I want you to do, and here's how you could improve your questions and all this stuff. And I think we need to be intentional about thinking about those things to help our individual contributors get there. So if it is a virtual meeting, have an after meeting. Don't just cut off and expect for them to know exactly what to do or send them an email and expect them to know. Like continue that dialogue and communication with them. And I think that we just need to be mindful in thinking about these things as we're operating in different venues. But I think that when things bottle up and they're not communicated, that's where the conflict comes. So you wait a year to tell somebody what they did wrong. First of all, they might not even remember. They might not be there anymore. And attrition and training people is expensive, or it's just not productive. So I love all these things, just keeping in mind people do want to contribute and they want to contribute well for the most part. And how do we help them get there?
Really coming in with that perspective. So for all those of you who did think about those questions right at the beginning that we had asked you to think about, thinking about your high five moment, was this team a cohesive team? How did you contribute to that? What did you do collectively? What was your contribution to that? And then individually for yourself, what really unfolded there? And then the other scenario, yeah, things that were a little bit of a disappointment. If you had to be really honest and look back now, what area would you wish you spent a little bit more time in, or really came up as the area that created that gap or that bit of challenge? So to really develop your desired team culture and the dynamics in and amongst people, Deborah and I have really kind of focused here on 4 different areas. And Deborah, I'm going to take a drink of water, but I'm going to actually turn it over to you a little bit on getting started with this, and I'm going to jump in with you.
Sure. So on this slide, we wanted to sort of think about like, how do we marry work ethic with work-life balance? Like, can they be together? We know that work-life balance is very important, a priority for a lot of people these days. We know people understand mental health better and the need to take care of mental health. So how can we marry work ethic with work-life balance? And can we strengthen work ethic and embrace hybrid workspaces? How do we strengthen work ethic in the hybrid environment? I did have someone tell me, and I actually agree with this, like high performers often perform even better when it's hybrid and they have some opportunity to work remote, because it gives them more time in their life to do other things. So they're a high performer, but they might need to get a little bit more rest or, do an extra workout. And those things are important. So giving some flexibility can help them perform even better. But sometimes the less strong performers, we don't know if they're online or not, and there's more issues. And, how do we marry that? But how do we make people have a strong work ethic in hybrid? From a legal perspective, I don't like to generally see like over monitoring employees, keystroke monitors. I think if you're micromanaging and over monitoring, I don't think that that's, a great working environment to be in. So I think it needs to be done from the leadership side. And then, the question that we're still all toying with and we don't really know the answers to: does in-person work build stronger work ethic through mentorship and daily observation? And, it may or may not. It may depend on the area. It may depend on the experience of the worker. But I do think it's important, if you're in a fully remote environment, to make sure that you're manufacturing those touch points if they don't exist. Because, when I was, learning and in my junior years, a lot of my learning moments were walking for a coffee with someone or grabbing lunch with someone. So if that's not there, if you're calling people back into the office, make sure you're there doing those things. And if you are fully remote, then how do you manufacture those things? Do you make a Zoom coffee date? But we need to think about those things and building work ethic in this hybrid environment. Because when people are engaged, they are going to have more work ethic. And if you don't have those touch points, it's easy for someone, especially a junior worker who might not know what's, going on, to fall off.
Yeah, I'm curious, if we go back, there's 69% of people on the call really thought there are generational differences in worker engagement. And there's a mid-range of current engagement. So it'd be a really interesting conversation within your workplace to explore work-life balance. And for some people, that term doesn't resonate as much as for others. And it might not be to the clock or the beginning and end of a day, but different ways that we get the work-life experience and just the experience that we want to have and how we're feeling. I think there could be really great conversations in here. And sometimes, people, we often see something that might say it's a lack of work-life balance, and then we assume it's work ethic. But wouldn't it be a great conversation to really have as people, when we do that team cohesiveness, if people really were to share with each other what an ideal day looks like, we're going to hear elements of what people value, what their work ethic is, and how that's really being formed. I love your phrase, Deborah. I really like that. Manufacture those touch points, leaders. Don't think that don't assume it's happening. And I think to be really bold and courageous in what that can be. When we talk about high performance teams doing things differently, one of the things I have been seeing and reading a lot of is high performance teams are not afraid to pick up the phone. Does it have to be a text? Just pick up the phone. Does it have to be scheduled time in? Maybe you can pick up the phone. I had 2 people call me a few weeks ago, 2 clients, and I just thought, this is so refreshing. What made you decide to just pick up the phone instead of an email? I'm finding this really refreshing. And so they told me why they did that. And so just thinking about those moments, things that does it have to be really scheduled that way? And as you get to know more of the people on your team and what makes their day, do they even know that maybe that phone call might really make a difference? But I really like how you said this, Deborah. We don't have the answer for the very bottom one here, that work ethic, but I think this is really on people's mind and could be a great conversation.
And yeah, and another thing that strikes me about this conversation is like work smarter, not harder. Like I think that we can all agree, like the idea that you have to work a million hours and that makes you a good worker. No, if your worker's productive and reaching their goals and they have a little bit more flexibility, what does that look like? Depending on what their job and their role is. But I think we want to encourage productivity because we want to have, whatever it is our goals to get completed. But it doesn't mean necessarily that they have to, sit at their desk 14 hours a day. And we probably don't want that because that becomes unproductive and that takes away from work-life balance and that causes burnout. So I think that that's some of those, can we think about if they have a hybrid work schedule, does that help with productivity? Because it's more, they don't have to commute. These are things that we should be thinking about as well.
Well, going forward. Well, as Deborah and I wrap up our time, we wanted to leave you with this thought that Building and Leading Teams program, we are so excited to be co-facilitating this with each other at the end of April in Toronto. And so if you want to take a deeper dive into how teams today are truly having that impact, the new blueprint for team effectiveness, we're going to dive a lot deeper in these areas of performance, team leadership competencies, and cohesion to get that. We would love to see you in that program. If there's something here today that's got you even more curious, our Queen's programs really do give you an opportunity to work on real topics and opportunities and challenges in your workplace while gaining so much sharing from other people in the program. And then you also get a chance to share back, look at best practices, engage with experts and true experiences here that Deborah and I have been so fortunate to bring to you. So it would be really like to see you in that upcoming program. And I think, Deborah, should we shift into some questions here with Lindsay?
We would love to answer questions about anything that we shared or anything on topic at all. Get your free legal advice.
Yeah.
We'd love, so if you share some questions, we're happy to answer them because other attendees may have those same questions.
Definitely. So yes, everyone, if you'd like, and if you have any questions or comments, you can feel free to enter them into the Q&A box just down in the bottom section there of your Zoom screen. We'll do our best to try and address as many of the questions as we can as they start to trickle in here. But I do want to thank both Linda and Deborah for today's thoughtful session. I think you've even given me a lot to think about in my own sort of leadership style with my team. So do thank you for that. Okay, so got a question here. Is the Building and Leading Teams program available as an in-house program? I mean, I'm happy to answer that if you two don't.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. So this program is available as a custom program. So Queen's IRC does customized programs for organizations. We'll work with you and your team to sort of decide what sort of objectives you're looking for the individuals who would attend the programs to be able to complete upon finishing the program. But certainly this new program is available as our open enrollment program. That is running, it's our first iteration in Toronto in April, but as well as a customized program. So feel free to give us a call or send us an email, and we're happy to have that discussion with you.
Yeah, I think the question, if I get it right, can we do it with intact teams within our organization? And love Lindsay's answer. And if you've got a team, a small team, bring them to the program and you could come together.
Yeah, that's very great. Yes, definitely. Just a couple people here saying thank you. What are some ways to support your team to collaborate with other teams?
Yes.
That's a great question.
Great question. Do you want to tackle that first?
I'll leave it to you, Linda.
Okay. Well,
I get hired for the conflict.
Yeah. Which will come. I'm hearing this a lot too, and it's really great that what is the organization's expectation on teamwork? So that might be a great way for your team to really spark that conversation, but it really is a conversation around the culture, the organizational values, and how work within that strategy and the expectations to get done together. Really creating and understanding those team norms across departments. And it's really common now that people are on multiple teams, multiple projects across 3 divisions possibly. So my first question is what has been set at the top of the organization linked to the strategy? Is there philosophy around how you're serving your customers and clients that you can then adopt and use across your teams? And whenever you have a team agenda, that is at the top of the page. Our corporate team expectations, our philosophy, how we're building that in. So in a quick answer, that's one of the things I would do right away. The fact that you're asking the question, you're halfway there already, because that's exactly the conversation that needs to happen. We're so interdependent. Great organizations, that's one of their strongest muscles, or should be.
Sounds great. So the next question, someone says, I am a high performer and I've just approached my manager about working hybrid. Although it's being accepted, how do I convince them that it's a great idea?
I mean, that's hard. Like from a legal perspective, an employer can ask its employees to work wherever they want, like fully in person or hybrid or remote, depending on what your contract says or collective agreement, if it's applicable. But we can't sort of mandate, where we work. But I mean, I do think that there's a case that hybrid, is a great thing, especially for for diversity and inclusion. For example, working parents might need, some more flexibility, and for productivity. But the things that I think from an organizational perspective, they'll want to ensure is that it's implemented in a fair way, because, I get feedback when it's like, one person gets to do it and the other person doesn't. So you can try to make your case and see what the policy is, and go from there.
So the next question, how would you recommend a leader build a common vision for their team when each individual may have a different lens or outlook on the overall vision for the department?
Yes, find out what those individual visions are. Share the lens that everyone's working, for everyone to see how they see it. And one of the best things that you can do as a leader is to also add your vision and your way to really bring that together and collaboratively then make a decision of what that looks like. I think one of the greatest starting points is when team members share, here's what I think it is. Oh, interesting. I don't see it the same way, but here's what I think. Oh, I kind of see that too. Because everyone gets a chance to hear what each other is saying. And if they're there to build, if they know right away that they're built to hear a collective one, let's hear our individual experiences so far. And then let's create the next one going forward. So it's not judging the past, but you're moving forward to evolve with the next one. And you're, as a leader, facilitate, guide the discussion, and you may then be the one to bring it all together to set forth the next vision. And then a year from now, we're going to check in again. Like just keep moving it forward that way without judgment. This is how we're evolving. But the fact you asked that, I think it's awesome. Yes, they're going to be different. So embrace learning about it. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Deborah, but.
No, I love that. I think it's important to learn what everybody's thinking to come up with the cohesive group view, rather than to just like sort of try to impose a view without considering what everyone else is thinking, because then we're going to not have that cohesiveness.
And then really think evolution. Here's our next one. So you're not looking in the rearview mirror criticizing. You two have it wrong. These three have it right. What's our evolution for the next 6 months on our vision? Yeah. Those are great questions.
Yes, very good.
I hope all these people come to the program, Deborah.
Yeah, me too.
I'm just noticing the time here, so we just have a couple minutes left. There are quite a few questions still, so I'll just pick one here. And then any questions that we don't get to, we can also include maybe some answers then with our follow-up email. So the last question here, our organization is only now starting to consider hybrid working arrangement with 1 or 2 days per week working remotely. What are 2 to 3 top things we can train our supervisors to do in advance to set their expectations with their teams?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Well, I think people should know, for example, basic information, like when they're expected to log on and when they're expected to log off. And, if they have structured breaks in their day, like to sort of maintain the same structure as the workplace, or if they need to step away for, a longer period of time to attend an appointment, just to let the team know. I know that those things are basic, but just let everybody know what the rules are. I think that that's one thing that I would recommend, and being mindful of time, I'd flip it to Linda to hear her last.
Yeah, you've got, whoever you are, you've got a beautiful question there. I'd get those supervisors ready for that first in-person day. What's one thing they are going to lead their team through, big or small, that immediately sets the tone that when we're in person, here's the type of conversation and work we're going to do. here's a co-creation opportunity. Like set your supervisors up success to right away set the tone with that first in-person day. And then keep supporting that and how that day is going to be different than when they're remote. So I think that's what a great opportunity, and love the pre-planning and thinking about let's set our leaders up for success.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending today's session. As you know, we do have an upcoming program with Deborah and Linda that will be slated for April 29th to May 1st in Toronto, the Building and Leading Teams program. So if you are interested in registering or learning more, please feel free to reach out to us. We are currently offering a special introductory price for the first session of this program, so check that out. As a reminder, the webinar recording will be sent out to everyone who has been registered to attend. So feel free to revisit today's discussion or share it with your colleagues. If you do have any lingering questions or you want to learn more about Queen's IRC programs, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again to Deborah and Linda for leading today's session, and we look forward to seeing everyone at future IRC events. Bye now.